$5,000. That's why voter fraud is rare. That's why you rarely read of instances of voter fraud. And let me just say, in 2000 in Missouri, the Secretary of State claimed that 79 voters were registered with addresses at vacant lots. But there was an investigation later, and they found out that there were people who actually lived in those houses. The problem we have in America today is that our voter registration lists are incomplete, they're inaccurate, and they haven't been cleaned in such a long time. Who knows who's on those? I'm sure Bruce Springsteen, Mary Poppins, Santa Claus, and everybody else. Until we get serious about how we conduct elections in this country, we will continue to have problems.
Okay. Mr. Chairman, let me answer the one question. Commissioner Yegi, you asked the question about how many people have voted in person illegally that ID would have prevented. Detroit Free Press did a study in Michigan last December. They found more than 120 people cast ballots in the name of dead people. Now, you might say 120 fraudulent votes that could have been prevented by ID aren't enough. But tell that to the citizens of Washington State, where they decided their governor's race by about that margin. You find very close, as we saw in Florida, thin margins, as Chairman Reynolds is noting, thin margins in elections are deciding not only who's our president, who's our governor, who's our senator being decided. So 120 votes, as were found by the, and that was in a limited sample in Michigan. Now, by definition, a ballot cast at a polling place in the name of a dead person is a ballot cast fraudulently by somebody who, if they had to present a photo ID, would likely have been prevented from doing it. So it is a kind of reasonable common sense reform to stop documented cases of vote fraud. Donna, you mentioned the case in Missouri with the study that we did after the 2000 election. That election by the Democrat Secretary of State, at that point, Becky Cook, found that 48 people just appeared at different polling places and cast a ballot illegally without ever being authorized to do so. So it is a documented fact when we look for it that it happens. Now, many states don't have an ID requirement at all, so it can go on very easily. The only thing in St. Louis, Missouri, that would prevent Ritzy the dog from casting a ballot that would void mine or some other voter in Missouri is the fact that somebody coming to the polling place pretending to be Ritzy Meckler, who we found was a Cocker Spaniel, had to first provide an identification. That's why it's a confidence building. That's why we actually find that these kind of ID requirements, again, when we make sure everybody gets one and we have it for free, when we have that, you find it actually increases participation in the elections, as the Professor Lott's study found.
Donna is, I think, very right. Not all of these allegations ultimately pan out, and I think we have to be discriminating. However, remember, we're dealing both in the case of voter intimidation and in the case of voter fraud with illegal behavior. So just to point to the number of prosecutions, just to point to the number of people who caught at it, since it's illegal behavior, you're not going to catch the entire problem. To say that it's rare is the same thing as to say that we don't know the full extent of the drug problem in this country because it's illegal. You're not going to know all of it because people are not going to volunteer information about it. It's in the shadows. I mean, I've actually seen academics. I mean, I've actually seen academic studies.
I mean, to compare voting to the drug problem is just, I mean, it's just a stretch.
It's are not going to the number of people who caught at it. Since it's illegal behavior, you're not going to catch the entire problem. To say that it's rare is the same thing as to say that we don't know the full extent of the drug problem in this country because it's illegal. You're not going to know all of it because people are not going to volunteer information about it. It's in the shadows. I mean, I've actually seen academics.
I mean,
I've actually seen academic studies.
I mean, to compare voting to the drug problem is just, I mean, it's just a stretch.
It's illegal behavior, and it's in the shadows. One of the things I have seen academic studies that have actually purported to show that the level of vote fraud.
Go on.
To repeat, I have seen academic studies that have actually purported to show that the level of voter fraud in this country is very small simply by going out and interviewing people in the election process. I'm sorry. You're going to have people who commit these activities, whether they're intimidation or whether they're fraud, who are not going to admit it. And in addition, the election officials are not exactly going to demonstrate or talk about the frailties in their system because that reflects poorly on their own behavior and their own performance.
Well, I just want to ask one question about the photo ID bill that's floating around the that's floating in the Senate now after it passed the House. I'd like to get your honest opinions about it because I seem to have heard that all of you, and maybe I'm wrong, believe that one, it's a good idea. Two, there's some issues regarding accessibility. I'm not saying all. You know who I'm talking to, Ms. Brazil.
Okay.
There are issues of accessibility that you think, might be something that be worth addressing. So one of the questions is whether or not you think that having this kind of new photo ID, whether it's getting a birth certificate, whether it's producing this kind of stuff, given the statistics and given the fact that when you look at the demographics of who would probably be impacted the most, it's lower income, it's minorities, it's language, it's people whose English is not their first language. How do we get accessibility to those folks? How do we do it in terms of money? How do we do it in terms of outreach? And given the fact that HAVA has been underfunded by $800 million anyway, what realistic shot is there that that's ever going to happen?
Well,
and should we care? I think we should.
Yeah, I think we should as well. And let me answer both your first question and second question. The first question is, how much fraud is there out there? My answer to that question is, we don't know. We don't know. I mean, we could know if we really cared by doing something very simple that most countries do, which is they have a poll book at each election site, and they register every irregularity that occurs during the course of the day. For example, one time I went to vote, and I found that somebody had already voted under my name. I had no recourse at that point to find out why this had occurred, whether there was some error or whatever else. And the polling station itself didn't keep any record of it. So we wouldn't know whether there's whether it's a large number, whether it's no number, or whatever. My personal view is that we're likely to see a small number if it occurs. We don't know how much, but even a small number is important because if there's a close election, it makes a big difference. And it's also presumptive.
And I'm not disagreeing with that.
The second question is a critical one that you just asked, which is if these voter ID